It's a new year, Mike. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good, and I've been thinking a lot about how we start a new decade here on Ungeniused.
Oh, I don't like it when you say things like that.
Look, what topics in my past have been...
What could indicate to you that I might pick something you won't like?
Maybe the serial killer series we did. Anyways.
Yeah, probably.
I decided that we should talk about dates, but it turns out that writing an episode about how calendars work and the history of calendars, Mike, it's impossible. I was looking through the suggestion document from our listeners, and I found the perfect thing to start off a new decade, expiration dates.
Oh, like the ones on food and like milk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
On the surface, this is fairly simple. An expiration date is a previously determined date after which something should no longer be used. This can be enforced by the law or simply exceeding the anticipated shelf life of things like perishable goods.
That sounds good. Thanks for listening, everybody. We're done now, right? Like that was it? Is that the new 2020 trend?
No,
just 90-second episodes?
No, don't hang up.
Okay.
You see, these dates apply to far more than just food. Do you know that infant car seats have expiration dates because the materials they are made of change over time due to things like temperature swings in parked cars?
Not only did I not know that, nobody knows that, no parents know that, and you've terrified all of them.
No, I'm a good dad. I knew that.
Really? You knew that? How did you know that? Why did you know that?
Because I'm a good dad.
No, that's not acceptable. Why did you know that? Who would know that there was an expiration date in a car seat?
Actually, when you get a car seat, it's printed all over it.
Oh, really? I've never bought one, so.
Sunscreen is only good for like 4 years.
Who has sunscreen for more than 4 years?
Maybe you don't go outside very often.
But come on. If you don't need it so much that it would last for 3 years or 4 years on a shelf, you've just thrown it away by now. Like, you don't need it. Who's using the same bottle of sunscreen after a 4-year break? Who's doing that?
You're really hung up on this. We have to move on. Motor oil might only last about 5 years, which blows my mind. It's oil. How could it go bad? But apparently it can.
Give up on the oil. Do we need to move on?
Unopened oil-based paint will stay good for about 15 years.
Oh, so when you add paint to oil, it gives it like 10 more years?
Yeah, it's a miracle drug. Latex-based paint stays good for around 10 years. And bike helmets, if you're a frequent cyclist, you should probably replace them every 2 years or so because the damage of UV light from the sun will weaken the plastic and not protect your brain as well.
It's great. Sure, we'll have to check underneath my house to find out what the expiration date is on that because clearly everything just turns to dust eventually. That's good.
So everything is fragile and temporary. Everything goes away in the end.
I want to go back to food. Shelf life is the recommended maximum time for which products or fresh harvested produce can be stored, during which the defined quality of a specified proportion of the goods remains acceptable under expected or specified conditions.
So here in America, the United States Department of Agriculture has a big say in these dates. For example, did you know that the government says, and I'm quoting, canned foods are safe indefinitely as long as they are not exposed to freezing temperatures or temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, about 32 degrees Celsius. And if the cans look okay, they're probably safe to use.
So do not eat from cans that are rusted, swollen, or dented.
Noted.
A big factor in shelf life is how the food is packaged, stored, and also displayed. Of course, bacterial contaminants are basically everywhere. Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
So foods left unused too long will often be contaminated and become dangerous to eat, leading to food poisoning or more.
Happy New Year.
Don't eat that food.
Don't do it.
Please don't eat lunch while you listen to this episode.
The process can be affected by storage methods. A refrigerated gallon of pasteurized milk can remain good and fresh for quite a while, but if you forget it in the backseat of your car on a summer day, things are going to turn quickly.
Don't drink that milk.
I have a story about this. Years ago, I had a job where I spent quite a bit of time in Texas. So I live in Tennessee, but I fly to Texas all the time for this job. And someone had left one of those meal replacement shakes. You know, there's lots of dairy in those. In the trunk of the company car that I drove when I was down there. I was very fancy in the past. One day, one of those that had been left back there exploded. It's really hot in Texas in the summer.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
The smell was, you could smell the car as you approached it from the outside. We had the carpet removed from the trunk of the car and the bare metal pressure steam cleaned, and it still smelled like death. It was awful.
Let's move on to a lighter subject and talk about the fact that your medication can go bad. The expiration dates of pharmaceuticals specify the date that the manufacturer guarantees the full potency and safety of a drug. Most medications will continue to be effective and safe for a time after the expiration date, but it varies, and obviously if you're using some old medicine, it might not be as effective as it used to be.
A study conducted by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration covered over 100 drugs, both prescription and over-the-counter. Their study showed that about 90% of them were safe and effective as long as 15 years past their expiration dates.
That is a much larger number than I would have expected, but I think I'm still going to keep an eye on the expiration dates of stuff that's in my home.
I mean, better safe than sorry with medicine, right? Like, why would you risk it?
Yeah, don't be sorry when it comes to medicine.
No.
It's like, don't do that.
This episode of Ungeniused is brought to you by Pingdom from Solar Winds. Do you have a website? If you do, think about the components of it: shopping cart, registration forms, contact us pages. If you have that in your life, then you need Pingdom. Nobody wants their critical website transactions to fail. This means a bad experience for your users and can mean lost business. But the good news is you can set up transaction monitoring with Pingdom. Transaction monitoring will alert you when cart checkouts, forms, and login pages fail before they affect your customers and your business. Pingdom will let you know the moment any of these fail in whatever way is best for you. You can customize how you're alerted and who is alerted depending on the severity of the outage. Pingdom cares about your users having the smoothest site experience possible, and if disaster strikes, you'll be the first to know. It's super easy to get started. Go to pingdom.com/relayfm right now for a 14-day free trial with no credit card required. When you sign up, use the code UNGENIUS at checkout to get a huge 30% off your first invoice. Our thanks to Pingdom from Solar Winds for their support of this show and Relay FM.
So I've always wondered about the different labels that are used to describe all of these things, because you'll get some that say expiration dates, then you'll see some that say best before or use by or sell by. I think we need to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, it does seem confusing, but I think maybe it's not as bad as it first appears, but it's also not great. So best before or best by dates, I'm doing air quotes.
Good, I could see those, thanks.
You can kind of like, you talk in italics. We've talked about this, right? Like,
yeah.
So best before, best by dates, they appear on a wide range of foods, but they're only advisory dates, and they refer to the quality of the product. This is in contrast with use by dates, which indicate that the product may no longer be safe to consume after whatever date the label specifies. And then there's sell dates, which usually back up some number of days from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess like something can be consumed after the best before date. It wouldn't necessarily be harmful, just not as good as it could be. The same with sell by, right?
Right. But you really should heed the advice of those use by dates. This is because some foods can go bad quickly and actually could become dangerous if spoiled, right? We talked about that bacteria earlier and other things. This date is pretty common on foods that have to remain cold. That's a big part of this, is how they're stored.
But that's not all. There's also the freshness date, which is a term used in the American brewing industry to indicate either the date the beer was bottled or the date before which the beer should be consumed. So don't drink a beer if the freshness date is in the future from the day you're reading it.
It's the opposite of all the other ones.
Yes. Yeah. So really pay attention.
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, the first use of this was in 1935 by the General Brewing Company out of San Francisco, California. This was to ensure that the beer had been aged properly, because a bunch of breweries had rushed beer to market when Prohibition ended, and customers were getting beer that wasn't quite done yet, and they didn't want any part of that.
So as you can imagine, this system is far from perfect. According to the UK Waste and Resources Action Programme, 33% of all food produced is wasted along the cold chain or by the consumer because of these dates. In light of this study, the UK government's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs revised guidance in 2011 to exclude the use of sell-by dates, as this date isn't a sign that food is about to go bad and may scare would-be buyers. So it removed one of the 3 dates that would sometimes be on a package in the United Kingdom.
However, all this is balanced with the fact that a large number of people get sick every year due to spoiled food. According to the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control, every year in the U.S. alone, there are 76 million foodborne illnesses, leading to 325,000 hospitalizations and 5,000 deaths.
I knew you were going to get death in there somewhere. Governments around the world handle this in different ways. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency produces a guide to food labeling and advertising, which sets out a durable life date. This guide sets out what items must be labeled and the format of the dates themselves.
I wonder if the guide to food labeling and advertising, is that an exciting read?
I bet everybody in Canada just knows that cover to cover.
They deliver it door to door.
Mm-hmm.
In Hong Kong, prepackaged food, which can be highly perishable and is therefore likely to have a short period of time before it gets dangerous, like we just talked about, those are required to use the use by label instead of the best before label because it's more serious. You got to be serious with your labels.
And of course, we now move over to Germany, where one differentiates between the Mindesthaltbarkeitsdatum, the MHD, which is roughly the minimum shelf life, and the Verbrauchsdatum,
sure,
which is more in line with the common expiration date. The MHD has been criticized for possibly causing food waste. For example, the then Minister Christian Schmidt complained that many still edible foods with an expired MHD would be thrown away by consumers who would misunderstand the MHD as the expiration date. I just want to say here, what we've read here is pretty similar to what's happened in most countries. Stephen definitely only put this in here, so I would try and say Mindesthaltbarkeitsdatum.
I think it's also the only time on this show where we've come across an abbreviation that's just for one word.
Well, I'm sure there are lots of those in Germany. Germany, I love you, but your language is madness to the rest of the world.
Very verbose.
But that's kind of what makes it so charming, I think. It's a German word for everything.
Speaking of charming, let's talk about your country.
All right.
In the UK, food manufacturers are... obviously, the government has oversight, and the government dictates that technical expertise should be hired for regular and ongoing end-of-shelf life safety and quality testing. Shelf life trials must be conducted using the same ingredients, equipment, procedures, and manufacturing environment as actual food used in actual production. It seems very rigorous, which I'm a fan of. This should be rigorous.
Sale of expired food products per se is lightly regulated in the US. Is probably the best way to describe this. Like some states restrict or forbid the sale of expired products. They require expiration dates on all perishable products or both, while other states just don't. However, sale of contaminated food is generally illegal and may result in production liability litigation if consumption of the item results in injury.
I'm not okay with this. Why is this so lax?
Well, progress is kind of being made. Voluntary industry guidelines
Come on.
announced in 2017 from the Grocery Manufacturers Association and the Food Marketing Institute recommended using only best if used by or used by to avoid confusion that leads to food waste. Of course, this doesn't dictate that it should be used. Just here's some better wording you could use. And in 2019, the Food and Drug Administration urged food manufacturers to adopt the voluntary standards.
You're the government. You don't have to urge. You can just tell.
Just urge. It would be lovely if you could just maybe put these dates.
If you have time the next couple of years, it's a little slow around the food factory. Maybe you could, if you want to, think about applying some of these rules to some of your products. USA. USA.
Yeah, there it was. I was going to say, I noticed you hadn't used that one yet.
Yeah. Well, I think we're done.
I think we are.
I'd like to thank Adam for this suggestion. Once again, something way more interesting than it has any right to be. If you want to learn more about expiration dates and shelf lives and car seat expiration dates, a bunch of stuff, check out the show notes. You can find them this week at relay.fm/ungenius/96. While you're there, you can send us an email with your own topic suggestion, or you can do so on Twitter. The show is at Ungeniused. You can find Myke there as IMYKE, and you can find me on Twitter as ISMH. Until our next bout of accidental food poisoning, Myke, say goodbye.
Watch out, everybody. Goodbye.
Adios.